Hello everyone, welcome to Java tutorials. My name is Kishore. In this video, we will discuss about checked and unchecked exceptions. Checked exceptions must be handled at the compilation time itself because the compiler will check at the compilation time. Whereas unchecked exceptions are not checked at the compilation time. The reason checked exceptions must be handled at the compilation time is there could be the statements which might generate exception, not every time, but sometimes. It could be like accessing the DB to perform some database operations or accessing the files to perform read or write operations. When your program tries to connect to these external resources, there could be chance that these external resources may not be available. In that case, the statements will fail to execute the operation. In that case, you are going to get an exception and your program should not abnormally terminate. It has to handle that exception. For that reason, whenever you write such statements, compiler will force you to use try-catch blocks. However, unchecked exceptions are not checked at compilation time because these are under programmer's control. It can be controlled so that that exception won't occur. Like a number you're dividing by zero, or you're trying to access the methods through the null reference, then you will get exceptions like null pointer exception or arithmetic exception. You can always avoid that by writing some if condition telling that this number should not be equal to zero. Then you can use that number to divide another number. And you can use an if condition that the reference is not equal to null, then you access the member from that reference. So what you have to understand is there are some exceptions you have to consider, checked exceptions which are not under programmer's control, correct? And some of them are in programmer's control. What are those exceptions which are checked and what are those exceptions which are unchecked means those exceptions which are the subclass of exception like SQL exception, IO exception, class not found exception are all checked exceptions except the runtime exception, which is unchecked exception. That is why you can see runtime exception subclasses are array index out of bounds exception, which you can avoid by accessing the array elements within the index. Arithmetic exception also you can avoid. Similarly, all these exceptions you can avoid in the code itself because they do not access any external resources. But these exceptions would generate whenever you are trying to access some external resources. For that reason, they are actually checked exceptions. To explain that, let me write one JDBC simple statement which is going to actually generate a checked exception. We are not discussing JDBC, but in some places, whenever you want to access the database, you would be writing some JDBC code. This code will generate an SQL exception. What is that code? Connection con equals driver manager. You have to import from SQL package, get connection, and you need to enter three parameters to the get connection. One is the URL of the database, another is the username of the database, and one more is the password of the database in order to connect it to the database. Purposely, I give everything empty because I need that exception to be generated. I am not connecting to the database because we are not discussing how to interact with the database yet. But I want to show you when you use this get connection method, even if you enter the right URL, right username, right password, compiler will generate a compilation error telling that this statement will generate checked exception. You have to handle it. And why that is actually generating an error is look at the get connection method signature. This is the get connection source code present in driver manager class, and look at the URL username password parameter, and after that in the method signature it is using the throws class. And what is this throws class going to do is the throws class tells that the get connection method is not going to handle the SQL exception. Whoever invokes the get connection method, they should handle the SQL exception. That is what the throws class does, and throws class will propagate the exception. And if you observe, The get connection method is actually invoking the get connection again. If I go to that get connection method, somewhere they are throwing SQL exceptions when certain things are not provided. Okay. And there is a throw keyword they are using. This is going to manually generate an exception called SQL exception in case the URL is null. And if the URL is wrong also, the SQL exception will be generated. So what you have to understand is the checked exceptions like SQL exception or IO exception, they all are generated with the throw keyword inside a method, and that method will not handle. Rather, it will be propagated to the caller, so that caller should handle. Here, who is calling the get connection? Main method is calling the get connection, and because the get connection method is propagating the SQL exception, the main method should handle this checked exception. Now, let me use the try catch block. Inside the try block, we will write this code, and we know that it is not going to print anything for a con because we are giving everything empty, so it will always be an error. And we should handle an exception called SQL exception. Let us write here SQL exception, and we will write print stack trace, and outside the catch block we will write program exits normally. So we know this is going to always give an exception every time we run the program because we are not providing any database credentials. So let me run this program. I always see no suitable driver found, and program exits normally is what I am getting because exception is handled. Every time I run this program, I will get SQL exception, and that is handled. Because of that, the program exits normally is printing. It means rest of the code present in the application will run smoothly. Similarly, there is one more code you can write. Let me remove this. Suppose you want to access a file to read. There is one class called file reader class you can use. So file reader class equals new file reader. And let me give a file name called abc.txt. And when I use this class, it has to be imported from IO package. And what is this class going to do is it is used to read the file. And there could be chance that this file not be present in the project or in some external location. In that case, there will be an exception. So if you observe, the file reader is the statement giving compilation error when you use, because this is actually propagating one exception, that is a checked exception called file not found exception. And if I place cursor over it, you can observe unhandled exception, file not found exception. So if I go to the source code of file reader, I see file reader constructor is taking a string that is a file name and throws file not found exception. It is propagating file not found exception, and there is a statement to read the file. And this file input stream might generate a file not found exception using the throw keyword, and it is not handling it. Rather, it is propagating it so that the caller who is invoking the file reader should be able to handle the exception if in case this file is not present. So what I will do, I will keep the try catch, and it is going to have a catch block with file not found exception. And if I now simply print program exits normally, let's see what happens. And simply I will print fr, which is a reference of file reader object. I know that abc.txt file, let me name it as abc.txt. I know this file is not present in my project. It will give error. Let me first run this program, and you can observe abc.txt is not found, and the system cannot find the file specified is printing, and program exists normally is printing. It means the file is not there, that exception is handled, and program exits normally is printing, so the program is terminating normally. But let me create a file called abc.txt in the project parent folder. So in the predefined classes project, I have created this exception related class. So there I will create one file called abc.txt, and notice that file is created. Now let me run this program and see what happens. Now see, the file reader object is printing its object toString return value, because whenever you print the object, toString will be called. And it is printing this object information. However, we are not getting an exception because that file is present. What you have to understand is the throws keyword is actually returned in the method signature or in the constructor signature, and it is always used to propagate the exception. And when the exception is propagated, it means the constructor or a method is not going to handle it. Rather, the caller is going to handle the exception. That is going to be the main method. He should know what should be done if in case the exception occurs. So now what the main method can do is main method can print one error message like sysout, or you can also use system.err.println telling that seems like file is not present. This is a message which you give to the user if in case the user tries to access this file. Because this file is present, we don't get that message. What if I write another file name which is not present? Obviously, abc2.txt is not present. If I run the program, I should see seems like file is not present, but program is still normally terminating. So that is how the checked exception, when you propagate in the method signature or in the constructor signature, the caller will get a notification that you need to mandatorily handle it because there could be chance of that exception. So that is how the throws and throw keyword work. But is it possible that I also can create a method and propagate? Of course, you can do that. What you can do, instead of you reading the file in the main method, what you do, you create one method here, public static void file read method, and what I will do is I will pass the file name. I will pass the file name, and I will create the statement that is like this, new file reader, and prints the file reader. And what I will do, I will not actually write the try catch block in the main method. I have a file read method which is having a statement called a new file reader. The compiler will give an error telling that new file reader object you are trying to create, this constructor is generating a checked exception because of the throws class. And your job is either you handle it or you can also propagate it. What you can do, there are two chances. Either you handle it here itself by using try catch statement, and we will print that file reader object here. Now what happens when the file reader object is printed, it means that it could able to read this file. And now whoever invokes the file read method, they will not come to know that there was a file not present or whether the file is present. Suppose if the main method invokes the file read method by passing the file name that is abc 2.txt, and this file name which is a reference taking that abc2 should be supplied like this, so that the new file reader is going to read that file name, and if that file is present it will print the file reader object, else the catch block will be executed. But main method will never come to know what happened. But anyway, print stack trace is printing in the console. In the console, it will print. What if the main method is present in user interface? User interface is a separate environment where the user is going to use the browser or the mobile. There, the system.out.println is not used to print the error messages, or print stack trace is not going to be used to print the error messages, correct? Means the print stack trace is going to print the messages in the place where file read method is executed. Assume that it is a server program, and assume the file read method is called by the client. Client will never see these messages, that print stack trace messages. Let me run this program. You can observe abc2.txt. is actually throwing the error, but program exits normally is printing because file read method only handling that error. Now you think this method is actually printing in the console, that is server console, and this is printing in the client console or in the client user interface. Now if I run the program, client will think that program exits normally, but this is printing in the server. Server is handling the exception, and the client thinks that the program is exiting normally, but the client will have a unexpected behavior. He is unable to read the file. Maybe he could not see the content. For that reason, this file read method should not handle the exception. Let it tell the caller what exactly happened. If there is an exception, what you can do is you can, instead of handling it, what you can do is you can actually write here like this. You can remove the file reader, you can remove this. But what you can do is if you are reading the file, it might generate a checked exception. You propagate that file not found exception. Now what happens is whoever calls the file read method, they should handle the file not found exception because file read method is not actually handling with try catch. So now the caller who is invoking the file read method should handle it. So what he should do? He should use the try catch. So he will surround with a try catch, and if in case the file read method generates a file not found exception, here the caller can print an error message that file you passed or file you are using is not found, and think this is going to be printed in the server console, and this is going to be printed in the client UI because this code is running inside the client program and this code is running inside the server. Now if I run the program, client program will understand that file you are using is not found, and anyway server is actually going to take care of reading the file and sending the content. In case the file is not present, the exception will be generated by this constructor, will be propagated to its caller. Now, is it possible that I can also generate file not found exception explicitly? Of course, it is possible. What you can do is you can handle the exception. Means this server can handle the exception as well as it can also throw the exception. What you can do is you can keep a try catch file not found exception, and here you read a file, print the file, and in case the file not found exception occur, you can use a throw keyword telling that new file not found exception. And the new file not found exception, what I am doing is, it is a constructor of the exception class I am using. I am manually generating the exception, and there are various constructors in every exception class. A default constructor is there, and even a constructor taking a string parameter is there where you can pass the error messages. Let me write here file not found means this file. I will write file name, the file. Whatever the file the client passes, I am just creating a message using that file name, and in the file not found exception I am telling that that file is not found. Now what happened here is, what is going to happen is when the catch block is executed, because file reader obviously throws an exception if the file is not found, the catch block will generate one file not found exception by itself with a custom error message, and that file not found exception which is generated in the catch block is not handled. Means here again an exception is generated. Here also an exception is generated by the file reader that generated the exception. and whatever the exception generated is handled, and we are regenerating the same file not found exception with a user defined message, and that file not found exception we are explicitly generating will be propagated to the caller, and the catch block will handle it, and this e variable is the one who is going to get that object, and what it can do is it can actually print an error message like this. That e variable, just like print stack trace, it also has a method called get message method, which is an inbuilt method to read the error message of the exception object. When you pass the parameter, that parameter is going to be used as a message variable in one of the exception class. That is, in the file not found exception, there is going to be one error message variable. That variable will be initialized, and there is a getter method. That is what we are calling to read that error message. And when we call the get method in the print statement, whatever the message is actually returning, that will be printed. Now what happens if I run the program? You can see file you are using is not found. Program exits normally, but observe here, it is printing file name abc2.txt not found. The reason is this file not found exception is going to be thrown. Because of that, the catch block that is executing handles that exception and printing the message. So that is how the throw keyword and throws keyword will be used. And then what happens in case I have one static void method, like say for example, this is a test method, and that generates unchecked exception like new arithmetic throws arithmetic exception. Assume it is taking one variable x, and it is just writing if x is equals to 0, we will throw arithmetic exception with an error message called x divided by 0 can occur, might happen, correct? So what I am doing is I will call the test method by passing a value to the x. If the x is equals to 0, I am writing throw new arithmetic exception, and I am also saying that throws arithmetic exception. It means I am telling if the test method is going to get this exception, I am not handling that arithmetic exception inside the test. I will say propagate the arithmetic exception to the caller. Let's say the caller is the main method who will invoke by passing some value 0. Look at the compiler is not giving an error even if the test method is propagating an exception, because arithmetic exception is an unchecked exception. Even if you propagate, it won't actually check it. That is why what happens now is compiler will never understand test method is throwing arithmetic exception, and it is going to generate an exception, and there is no handler. The program will abnormally terminate. You can see it is not printing program exits normally. But if I use try catch block, it is going to handle that arithmetic exception. And also, even if you do not write throws arithmetic exception, compiler will not raise any compilation error. It will not tell you are generating an arithmetic exception, you need to handle it. That idea compiler will not have, as arithmetic exception is part of unchecked exception. Now what happens if the x value is 0, here itself the exception will be generated, and JVM will actually terminate the program at this place itself. If I run the program, I would still get the same error message. So what you have to understand here is checked exceptions will recover from the error. Unchecked exceptions will not allow you to recover from the error. But unchecked exceptions are some program's mistake. You can always control it. Checked exceptions are not program's mistake. You cannot control it. That is why compiler will force you to use the try catch block in case of file reading, in case of connecting to the database. Checked exceptions plays an important role to make your application recover from the error. So that is it about the checked and unchecked exceptions. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.